All right, well, thank you all for coming to today's virtual breakfast. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Nicole Ritchie. I'm a field crops educator in Southwest Michigan. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Jason Deveau, Spray Guy. Jason studied biology and psychology at Mount Allison University, plant cell physiology at York University, and plant cell electrophysiology at the University of Guelph. Based in Ontario's Simcoe Resource Centre since 2008, he researches and develops practical methods to optimize productivity, effectiveness, and efficiency in all agricultural spraying systems. He is a founder and co-author of Airblast 101, Your Guide to Effective and Efficient Spraying, and he also founded and co-administers www.sprayers101.com. All right, Jason.
Thanks, Nicole. And good morning, everybody. That's a picture of me. Some silly bugger let me drive his sprayer, which is never recommended, and I admit to having a fantastic time doing it. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's dive in. So I was asked to talk about some research we've been doing the last number of years here in Southern Ontario, looking at directed applications in corn. I don't expect you to know what that is, so let's talk about it. You'll notice that this is titled Beluga Drop Hoses. Funny name, not my name, but you'll see why in a minute. So corn canopies, we all see them. We don't think about them from the perspective of a spray droplet, but corn canopies are really complicated. As a physical structure, they make it really challenging to get a droplet into them and where we want it to go. Here in Southern Ontario, we may have, why isn't this advancing? I will do it this way. We may have different canopy structures and planting spacings, but generally our corn's going to be 8 to 10 feet high. We tend to plant on 2.5-foot row spacing. Maybe the spacing between the corn in row is 6 inches. That gives us about 32,000 plants per acre. And I want you to note, look what I did for you. I got rid of that awful metric. That's because I care. Let's just zoom in on a single corn plant and look at the targets that we're after when we're spraying. We want the silks for something like Gibberella erot. We want the underside of the uppermost leaves if we're chasing western bean cutworm. If it's northern corn leaf blight, we'd like to cover the ear leaf and up. And if we're after tar spot, which I think we're all after now, it's ear leaf and up again. These are all very different targets, and they all require the spray to do very different things. So how do we spray? Well, we generally spray from overhead. When we apply crop protection products from overhead, either ground rigs or from aerial units, the first thing that we get is diminishing return. The number of droplets that are available to give us the coverage we need declines with distance. It's just simple physics. There are fewer and fewer of them available as they're hung up on the plant, filtered out, or blow off course. And one of the terrible things that happens when you spray from a single direction is you get shadows. Mutual shading hides those targets and the leaf undersides from the spray. If your droplet can't see the target, it can't get to the target. One of the things I tell growers to do is to look from the perspective of the nozzle. And if they can't see what they're shooting at, then the droplet's not going to get there. A little trickier when you're 10 feet up in the air, but the principle stands. And we've seen this before. Scouts have looked at this and recognized the problem. This is from Darcy Telenko at Purdue. I think this was last year. She sent this picture up on Twitter of tar spot. Plant looks clean until you move one of the top leaves out of the way and see where it prevented spray from getting to the leaves below. Now, what's the alternative? Well, the alternative to spraying from directly overhead is spraying from inside. That's a directed application. And conceptually, that should spray with more uniform coverage or panoramic coverage, and it should be directed right into the target zone where we're trying to reach. Instead of a droplet dropping 5 feet from the top of the tassel, why not have it go 6 inches from the inside? And if you're already in the canopy, maybe that gives us permission to use smaller droplets. Smaller droplets tend to stick better to hard-to-hit targets, and the smaller the droplet is, generally, the more droplets we have to work with. So drift is less of a concern if you release the droplet from inside the canopy, and maybe we get to take advantage of all the benefits of fines without all the disadvantages. So all great in theory, let's test it. And in 2019, with Albert Tenuta, who I'm sure you all know, and Dr. David Hooker, we had ourselves a little sprayer rodeo, and we compared 9 different systems of spray in corn just to figure out which one gave the best coverage. Generically, all ground rigs applied at 20 gallons an acre. Both aerial systems, helicopter and plane, applied at 5 gallons. We used water sensitive paper as a qualitative way to see where the spray went, but we dug down deep and used copper sulfate as an indicator of how much coverage or how much deposit we actually achieved. Think of it as a surrogate for an active ingredient. And we sprayed that at 1.75 pounds an acre. We added a little Agro 90, so it wasn't just water we were spraying, it was something that represented more of a formulated chemistry. And we traveled, at least the ground rigs did, between 6 and 8 miles an hour, all quite reasonable. So I just want to point out some of the designs that we used to spray. We had a front-mounted New Holland, had a front-mounted Hagie, and a rear-mounted Deere. But because I was really curious about the drops, we tried to test as many as we could get our hands on. This is the front-mounted Hagie, and we just used cheap old T-Jet hoses. You can buy these pretty much anywhere, and they're a little aggravating, so maybe you're already dismissing this. But I just want to point out a boo-boo. The first thing we did was misalign the darn things. Look at the nozzles at the inset photo at the bottom right. Those flat fans are aiming down, which is fine, but it would have made so much sense to turn them 90 degrees so you had this flat fan aiming top to bottom along the corn. So we did a pretty miserable job of setting this up, and I'm telling you this for a reason. I'm the king of foreshadowing. We also used the uber expensive, very cool Y drops with their 360 undercovers. We equipped them with T-Jet TT 11003s, and this thing's a car wash. It's got this big fender on the front and a kind of an aluminum manifold with nozzles sticking out in every direction. It looks like some sort of weird medieval morning star. And frankly, you just can't miss with this thing exploding in the canopy. So how much copper did we pull off of each situation? Well, the leader was the Y drop with the undercover. We retrieved more copper from inside that plant on all targets than any other system. The second best were those goofy T-Jet dangly droplets, drop hoses with the misaligned nozzles. And I point that out to say that even a garbage setup with drop hoses did better than any other overhead system or helicopters or airplanes. And when you compare the other systems, statistically, they were all kind of in a heap. Didn't matter what tip we used or what angle. Didn't matter if we set them up over the alleys or over the planted rows. It just didn't matter. But those drop hoses, that seemed to matter. So what did we learn? We learned that a directed application from within the canopy gave the highest deposition. Hooray for us, our theory panned out. But could we do better? I mentioned the undercovers. They have some limitations there. I'll get to those in a second. Not the least of which is they're expensive and a bit of a pain in the butt to put on and take off. Maybe we could do better with a different kind of drop. And ultimately, who cares? If we land more product in on our target, does that actually mean more money in our pockets? Does that actually mean that we had better efficacy? So around this point, two things happened. An associate of mine, an associate of mine, pointed out these beluga drop hoses. These are from Germany. They're called belugas because of these weird nozzle bodies that you see on the screen. For those who can't see, they're kind of shaped like a zeppelin, a blunt-nosed, rounded oval. And the nozzles kind of tuck into the back. And what that means is these things move through the corn or through the crop, kind of like a whale moving through water. They don't tend to snag anything. They don't tend to deflect or bounce too much. They just kind of smoothly move through. They were originally designed to spray neonicotinoids in canola in Europe. And 6 months after they hit the market, Europe said, guess what? You're not allowed to spray neonicotinoids anymore. Sorry for your luck. Wouldn't it be great if we could repurpose these somehow? So I showed them to a grower friend of mine, Dan Petker, who was foolish enough to let me come onto his farm and try these out. So they were appealing for a few reasons. Other hose systems are heavy. Anyone that's used Y drops knows that maybe they can't fold their boom out to 120 feet. They can only do 60. Otherwise, your boom's going to drop off. They're super heavy, and they're super expensive, and they're tricky to install. This is not a 5-minute job to put Y drops on and off. Anyone that's tried, and when you add the 360 undercover, that nozzle manifold, it's even tougher still. And as I pointed out about the Beluga design, other hose systems snag. Classic hard pipes will grab onto the corn and damage it, or, if it really snags, it's going to pull your boom. When they hit the ground, it's going to pull your boom. It's just a colossal pain in the butt. But the Belugas, they didn't. They're light, they flex, they were quick to put on, they were infinitely adjustable. They just made sense. So now the trick was they were designed for canola. How do we make them work in corn? We affixed hangers on the boom temporarily at first, and we set them so that each drop would hang in the alley between the corn on 30-inch centers, I believe it was. And the nozzle bodies themselves, the belugas, you get one shot at this. You permanently affix them, however many you like, at the heights that make the most sense. So we elected to use 110 degrees and overlap them the way you would typically on a boom if it was horizontal. We just turned the whole thing on its side. We wanted uniform coverage in the target zone. And where was that? For those that can see the screen, here's Dan acting as a model. He loves this picture. We knew that we wanted spray on the on the ear itself. And we figured that should come from the lowermost nozzle. That's where gravity's going to have the spray fall anyway. So let's aim directly at that ear. Because it's a 110-degree flat fan, half of that spray, the swath is going to be wide enough to reach the ear leaf. And the top nozzle, well, we'll reference that to 20 inches above the lower nozzle. So that's kind of where we fit the two of them. That gives us our primary coverage zone. Think of it as maybe the top half of the canopy. And for those that can see the video, we got a drone flying over top while these are going through corn. We tried to kick the hell out of these. We drove them sideways through the headland. We dragged them on the ground. We did everything we could. You can see as they're moving through the corn, the leaves are bouncing them left and right a little bit, but no more than a few inches. They stay plumb. They were really beautiful to work with. We went in with fluorescent dyes as a qualitative test. What did overhead look like versus the drop hoses? And we saw kind of what we saw in the rodeo. Little specks on any upward facing surface. They tended to be kind of big splashes, if I'm honest, and nothing on the underside. But when you used the beluga, which used finer spraying and sprayed from every direction, it didn't matter if you looked at the top or the bottom of the leaf, they were just covered. And that did lead to efficacy. Scouting over 3 years, 2021 through 2023 inclusive, we saw all kinds of disease and damage on the unsprayed checks. We saw some damage on the overhead broadcast, depending on where you looked, but the belugas just seemed to leave everything cleaner. And that's pretty subjective. So why don't we drill down to money? What I really liked about doing this study with Dan is Dan's a farmer, and Dan's very interested in the bottom line. So we did all the math on how much he was getting for corn, what his drying costs were, what operating the equipment cost, like a full study on what everything cost. And when we averaged 3 years of yield, and these were 1 acre size plots, by the way, these were not small plots, and we replicated each of these 8 times. So this is a big study, full field. What we ended up seeing was we made more money using the beluga system than we did the overhead, and certainly spraying fungicides in general made more money than a non-sprayed check. And it boiled down to this. Here's the average return on investment for this system. Dan profited $75 Canadian per acre by using drop hoses. Now, he would have profited $50.50 an acre from a conventional overhead application. And that means a difference of an additional $25 an acre Canadian by using oh, did I get that right? Yeah, an extra $25 essentially an acre if he used drops versus overhead. So what did it cost? This is as of last year anyway. 48 belugas were about $12,000 Canadian, 192 nozzles because you've got four nozzles on each drop hose, but you kind of have them in every second spot on the sprayer. So you're effectively doubling your nozzles. That added up to about 2 grand versus 72 overhead nozzles. What it boiled down to is based on his profit average over 3 years and the cost to set this up. This thing paid for itself in 260 acres. That's peanuts. We were really impressed by how this is, well, we continue to be impressed by how this is working. There are some obstacles. Remember, this was never designed for corn. So we're working on it with who makes these? Agritop in Germany to build better linkages for the sprayer to ensure that they can handle all the bangs and folds. Uh, we need some boom specific mounting solutions. There are a lot of different boom designs out there. They all fold different ways. So we've got most of them figured out now. We need an improved cleanout mechanism. I think we've finally added a quarter turn at the bottom of these so you can rinse them out more easily. The instructions were in German, and after we translated them to English, it was pretty sketchy. But I believe they've rewritten that to help anybody mount these effectively, including, and this is the tricky bit, where do you put the beluga bodies? Because that's relative to your boom height and your corn variety. Once you lock these in place, you can't move them. So the only way you can raise and lower the nozzle relative to your corn is by raising and lowering your boom. And you're already probably using a lift kit, so you may not have that variety or that span. We're also messing around a little bit with the nozzles, trying to figure out is an 015 viable or how fast do we need to go to get better flow. But this is still emerging. So that's it. That's the introduction to drop hoses in corn, the efficacy we saw and the return on investment. If there's time and you're interested to ask, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Jason. So now we're going to open it up for questions, and we've got quite a few questions in the chat, so I'll just start with those. So this is for you, Jason. Have you tried comparisons with a drone sprayer for efficacy of getting droplets swirling within the canopy?
Ooh, boy, have we ever. So drones are still verboten in Canada. For those who don't know, we have no pesticides registered for our past remote piloted application systems here. But we do get research authorization to play in them. And a couple of years ago, we did a massive study in corn with, I think it was a T30 at the time, DJI. And what we wanted to look at was where does this, very much like the study I just presented, where is the spray going? And what we determined was, boy, it wasn't going where we hoped it was going, depending on altitude and speed. We had 8 meter high drift poles set up that collected a lot of spray. But the concept is sound. You look at a drone, no matter how fast a rotary drone flies, there's always a dash. That's that swirling vortex of wind that the rotors create. Helicopters don't do it, contrary to popular belief. When they hit a speed where they start to spray, it's called transitional flight. They make a wake like a speedboat in the water, but that's behind them. There's nothing pushing straight down. So planes and helicopters behave very similarly over corn, but drones always blow down. And what we saw using 5 gallons per acre versus, I think the ground rig did 17 gallons an acre, was pretty crappy coverage. There just simply wasn't enough spray to do the job. So as a matter of percent area covered, it was maybe 20% of what the field sprayer managed. And we were really hopeful that that swirling downwash would create coverage on the underside of leaves. I put out 1,200 samplers. It ruined my life. We did plastic with dye indicators and we did water sensitive paper, and we barely saw drop one on the underside of those leaves. The spray fell as the spray would from any system. How you look at it, the percent area covered, or how much surface had spray, or the number of droplets that landed, think of that as a count per square area. The drones did surprisingly well for the number of droplets. In fact, they did as well as a ground sprayer. But as far as percent area, they're just, 5 gallons an acre isn't a lot of water. They just didn't do great for coverage. 2 gallons per acre, forget it. I still don't know why we're chasing this unbelievably low water volume. Even if you're spraying neat chemistry, you're in for a world of trouble. You're going to need formulation changes to make that work. But efficacy was really the question, and we didn't have a lot of disease that year, sadly. I've often said if you want to have a disease field free, a disease-free field, just invite me to do a study, and there'll be nothing in your control. So we didn't see a lot there. But in recent years, there's been some interesting evidence. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It's called striping. Tar spot may be a complete pain in the hiney, but it does turn a whole field into water-sensitive paper. If your dose is slightly less than it should be, you got brown corn. So we see stripes from all aerial systems where maybe they expect their swath to be wider than it actually is. And they've never been called out on it before because you don't see such an immediate physiological response between miss and hit, but you sure do with tar spot. And we were seeing that with drones as well, that we were hit, miss, hit, miss, hit, miss, expecting something like an 8 meter swath and maybe only getting 6. So this year, I'm going to be putting targeting back up, pardon me, in corn. It's a 50-foot target, a long sheet of receipt paper. It'll be suspended in corn at ear level and in corn, probably closer to the top, and we'll run passes from drones. I believe that we're going to see that swath truncated by 20-25% versus what you see when you calibrate them on the ground. I think that's where the trouble's coming from. And if we figure that out, it's possible that we'll see similar efficacy to a field sprayer. We just need to close the gaps. Now, whether that's an economically viable choice or you've got the time to spray 8-minute passes from a drone, that's another question. But is there potential for efficacy? Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Long-winded response, still an emerging technology, kind of fun.
All right, Jason, some more questions for you. So did you include a return on investment on the 360 undercovers?
No, no, those are $1,000 a pop, and you can only fold your boom out to 60 feet. So there was no reason to do math. You're going to have to drive twice as many passes, and you're going to pay a lot of money. The belugas were a tenth of the cost. You could run 120 feet. It was a no-brainer. But that doesn't mean that the Y drops with the undercover didn't work. In fact, I think they actually did better as far as coverage was concerned. But, when you add up all the shekels and figure out whether it was worth it, the belugas were just easier to use. They could take a hit better. You could fold your boom out. They were just more versatile in every sense. We could put one on and take one off in less than a minute, and you'd never know they were there, save the little hanger left over.
And that brings us into our next question. Will the beluga or drop hoses work on different space rows? So say 22-inch rows.
We've tried them on 20s. It's tricky. I'm going to go ahead and assume you planned it with GPS because you haven't got a hope if you try to follow tram lines on 20-inch centers with big dangly nozzles. They didn't snag. They didn't cause a lot of trouble, but it was a pain in the butt to get them lined up correctly. So short answer, I don't love it on tighter spacing, but we do have a guy here trying it, and I'll know more about that at the end of this season. I think there was a similar question there, Nicole, about horn targeting, that different heights depending
Yep.
on the environmental and ground condition. You're quite right. Once you drill a hole in this drop hose and snap the beluga in place, you're done. So where do you aim them? If you have a 2-foot differential in corn, you're sort of locked in place with this arrangement. And yeah, that's the truth. You're stuck. So one option is put your boom as high as it'll possibly go and then lower it to tassel height if you have that luxury, and align your two nozzle bodies to span that target zone. And then if the corn gets lower than that, you can lower your boom. If the gets higher than that, you should have some capacity there. But I always err on the side of having the nozzles a bit too high. That's how we've always sprayed, so that's not a big deal. And droplets fall. That's thanks, gravity. So I would rather err on the nozzles being a smidge too high and let gravity take care of it rather than have them release too low because they're not going up, at least not a lot. So you're going to have to work out what your range is for your given boom in your varieties. And when short stature comes knocking, it'll be a different conversation again.
All right, Jason, a couple more questions. So what tip sizes were you using and what vendor was handling the drops?
Well, I mean, here's the dirty secret behind all this. If you've got X number of nozzles on your sprayer, we turn every second one off. So now you have half the nozzles, and we suspend the boom in those positions. Now you've got four nozzles instead of one. All that to say, you've just doubled the nozzles on your sprayer. So, unless you want to spray 50 gallons an acre, you're going to have to go to a smaller droplet size or drive like a madman. So, we stuck with 015s and 02s. We actually didn't have any problems at all with the 015s, and I was shocked. I figured between pollen and garbage getting stuck in there, we'd have plugs all over the place. Nobody did. We have five growers running these in sand in every soil you can imagine. Nobody had problems. Uh, but we think the O2s are probably the best way to go. It just gave slightly larger droplets than the mistier stuff we got off the 015s. And we think it's more versatile for travel speed. And as for the vendor, I think it's all over the board. I think we ended up using Greenleaf Technologies flat fans, but it's a fairly conventional tip. It's just a 110 flat fan. Pick your poison, go with whoever you like. Everything will fit in those nozzle bodies as long as it's, ISO standard.
Two more questions for you, Jason, and then it sounds like we'll move on to some wheat questions. So, if the drop hoses had their nozzles oriented properly, would they have performed as well as the belugas?
Can't say, but I do know because of the nature of those T-jet drops. Imagine holding a string by one end and running with it. It flipped, it flopped, it dangled. The structure of the plastic on those drop hoses meant that there was a lot of unpredictability. But the belugas, that hose that suspends those two nozzle bodies in place, it's just the Goldilocks zone of stiffness. It can bend before it breaks. It pops right back into shape. If it does deflect, it finds plumb again. It's not just the hose, but the nature of the linkage. It's kind of a keyhole system. Imagine you've got a key, like an old skeleton key that you would slide into the lock of a door. That's how these are suspended. There's a sideways keyhole that hangs off the boom. You put these on sideways and let them go, and they just find plumb. So, unlike the dangly, whippy T-jet style, these are stiff enough to stay true and loose enough to take a hit. It's just a really clever design.
Great. This next one is about Western bean cutworm. So this comes from Chris DeFonso, our entomologist. You didn't have a Western bean cutworm infestation to evaluate, but do you feel that the spray deposition would hit the spot for them? And she says that based on what you showed, she thinks it would do pretty well. What are your
I,
thoughts?
I agree. I think, frankly, we simply didn't miss. The beauty of how a flat fan behaves if you turn it sideways is that half of the spray is going up and half of the spray is going down. You add the overlap to that of two of them kind of covering each other's butts, and you have a solid wall of spray moving up, down, and directly sideways. So we had wonderful coverage under leaf, between leaves, everywhere. I don't think you could have done much better if you hadn't uprooted the corn and just dipped it. It was really amazing. And what was cool about it is we had so little escape. I drove along on a lot of these sprayers and just watched. Occasionally, the ground would dip as the topography changed, and you get a little waft or a puff of spray escape. But it didn't go more than a foot above the tassel, and it settled back down. That means the entire payload was aimed directly at the target zone at all angles. Uh, I don't, I don't know. I think this is a big game changer. I wouldn't have thought after 15 years of doing this, a length of hose would be something I would crow about. But this is a pretty basic idea. Aim closer, aim from within, aim in every direction, and it works. So, intuitively it makes sense. Cost-wise, it made sense, and as far as efficacy is concerned, it made sense. The only real trick now is adjusting it to fit different sprayer boom designs, and dealing with the tighter row spacing that a lot of us plant on. But that's not insurmountable. It's going to take a little work. That's all.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. All right. These next questions are for Dr. Marty Chilvers. So how much yield reduction can we expect with the stripe rust that is present if you haven't sprayed anything? The flag leaf is still clean, but the rust is moving up the plant. And then in addition to that, if stripe rust is on the flag leaf, does that affect just yield or quality of wheat?
Okay, so the yield loss component really depends on um, how severely that plant is affected and for how long. So essentially, if stripe rust has moved up onto the flag leaf early, the hits are going to be much greater than if it moves up later. Um, in terms of wheat quality, there might not be a great deal. I guess I don't know. Um, but I'd be certainly more concerned about yield losses in fields where we've had a susceptible variety that we have out there and it didn't receive a timely fungicide application. And with respect to fungicides, we're pretty much outside the window now because we're looking at on the label 1054 growth stage or about 30 days pre-harvest interval. With everything being a little bit ahead of normal, we're really really pushing that end of the window now.
All right, thank you, Marty.
Yep.
There's another question for Jason that I had missed earlier. Sorry about that. What about soybeans? Have you done studies looking at getting fungicides within the soybean canopy?
Everybody asks this. I really wish I could say yes, but when you look at the structure of a soybean canopy, the petioles, that little part of the stem that holds the leaf to the plant, imagine just holding somebody's hand. When that canopy fills in, those leaves cross one another, and, you know, dragging a beluga through there like a shark fin in the water would probably tear them to pieces. Not to mention the fact that our booms in North America, frankly, kind of suck a little. You hit weird topography or drive too fast, they're going to start flapping like a seagull taking off, which means you have very little leeway between these things being dangled in the crop and dragging on the ground or popping out of the crop. Corn is far more luxurious. If it moves 6 inches in each direction, who cares? But in soybean, it's going to make a big difference. So all that to say, I can't find logistically a way to use them in soybean the way I would like. And I know we get pretty deep soybean canopies, but I can't get past tearing the leaves. Something I should have pointed out earlier, shameless plug, but also a place to go for more information, everybody. I do run a website with a colleague called sprayers101.com. It's a nonprofit. I work for the government as an extension agent. Think of it as a crop production publication online. But if you go there to sprayers101.com and type corn into the search engine, you'll see the full study from the belugas. You'll find the corn rodeo that led us to them. That's all laid out. And you'll see all the work that we're doing in drones as well. So I invite you to go there and take a look at the numbers, take a look at the experimental design, see if it's right for you, and you can make a decision if this is something that you might want to try yourselves.
Thanks, Jason. And he didn't mention this, but on their website, they also have these fun exploding sprayer myth videos, which I have really enjoyed. So if you're looking for exploding some sprayer myths in a funny, creative way, they've got them. Another question for you, Jason. Do you think there is potential for belugas on wheat with 15-inch spacing for fusarium head blight?
I don't think that's going to help you much. I really don't. If we're after panoramic coverage, spraying from the side, angularly speaking, like if you just do the trig, it it doesn't give us a lot more advantage than a really aggressive 30-70 front and back facing nozzle. Now, here's what it does do. Uh, I mentioned our crummy booms and their sway and their yaw. The real trick for panoramic coverage on wheat heads is keeping that boom as close to the crop as you can so that a coarser droplet can stay on its trajectory, smacking it in the face on the lead side, and then kind of reaching back and nailing it on the back as you pass over. But as the boom kind of waggles up and down, you're changing that distance, and that changes the direction the droplets are moving in. If it's too high, well, they pretty much just fall straight down. And there's no real advantage to having an asymmetrical or a dual fan. Spraying from the side means you avoid that problem. Even if the boom goes up and down, it's still facing the side. The difficulty is, once again, like densely planted corn spacing or the soybeans, you're snagging everything. And as those nozzles slide through the crop, they're just as likely to get temporarily plugged up by a wheat head that brushes against the orifice as not. So you don't actually give the spray an opportunity to go from being a sheet or ligaments to droplets. It's not really spray at that point. It's kind of fire hosing. So I physically, never saw the advantage to testing it. I also know that it would plug them like mad. I think your best bet is still low and slow, a dual fan, preferably an asymmetrical like a 3070, a slightly higher water volume and a coarser spray, and timing, timing, timing. None of those physics matter if you miss your timing. So get there when you need to get there, and slow down a little so you can keep those droplets on the right trajectory. I don't think belugas are a good fit for wheat.
Thank you, Jason. One more question, and we're going to direct this to Dr. Marty Chilvers. Do you know of anyone who's tried the peroxide treatments on wheat/rust? And if so, how did that go?
Yeah, I've heard of people talking about it, and I don't really think to my knowledge, no one's had any. The trick here is to leave check strips or controls, otherwise you're never going to know what's going on. We just haven't seen that product work for other diseases, and I really don't think it'd do a great job on rust or head scab.
Thank you. Are there any other specialists who are on who would like to like to talk about anything that's going on right now? All right. Just as a reminder, we do have the 2024 Weed Day on June 26th. That's an awesome opportunity to take a look at the latest and greatest in herbicide research. So you can find that on the MSU Extension website and register for that there. And as always, if you have any questions, we're here for you. Other than that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.